we think, you know, uh, for the work that we do and how we're connected to everyone, that it's more, you know, than just acknowledging the history, but it's acknowledging who we are and how we're connected to everyone. So, we at UCR would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, and Luiseño and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. And so for myself, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on the homelands of the Hachamen and Tongva peoples. As we get started, it'd be nice if everyone just in the chat also said hello to everyone and where you're from. So if you know your chat functions, go ahead and say hello to everyone. And from here, I'll turn it over to David Lowe.
Thanks. Welcome to everybody. Again, it's really exciting to have our second annual research symposium. Wanted to basically go on about how excited we are and how far we've come. I'm going to make a few notes about that, as well as what the establishment of the center has meant, both to the School of Medicine, to the campus at large, and as well as to the community of our partners that we've been working so well with. The theme of the meeting today is around structural racism, but this is really just one aspect of the range of topics that have been covered by research in the center and a lot of the affiliated research projects. So again, I'm going to keep talking about celebration. I wanted to give you an idea of how far we've come already in such a short period of time, and why I'm so excited and so thrilled about the kinds of things we'll be hearing about in the next few days. The grant was awarded originally in August of 2019, and it gave us about 4 months to build an administrative structure from scratch, do a first round of grant proposals and reviews, and also organize our first annual research symposium in February a year ago. And since then, in this remarkably short period of time, we've been able to build a really effective administrative staff to handle a huge range of activities, from purchasing, human resources, equipment, and so on. And the rapid growth has already meant that the center has been recognized as a primary point of contact, both in the community as well as statewide. And there's been a surprising variety of state and regional agencies. I'll give you a short list of the kind of contacts we've had. California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, the Stem Cell Initiative, the California Air Resources Board, the California Natural Resources Agency, the Salton Sea Authority, as well as local, as well as federal legislators. And these have all come to us for help on a variety of topics relating to health disparities and community engaged research, including more recently the COVID pandemic. And so it's kind of amazing that, so much noise and so on. And I admit, I don't even have a Facebook page. So it's really kind of remarkable to see. So of course, we recognize that our sibling institutions have already really well established centers focusing on community engagement and health disparities work. And we are learning so much from these other institutions for the impressive work that they've done and the way they've organized. But also I've seen that we have particular strengths of our own that will allow us to make important contributions. Our campus has great talent among our faculty and students and other researchers that actually are helping us make important contributions in our own way, in our own right. We're bringing in researchers into broader discussions on health disparities and community engagement, and how that perspective can be such an important component of research in really diverse areas, from engineering to ecology and environmental sciences, humanities and biomedical research. And so we really, these symposia are really an opportunity to celebrate this growth and the achievements on the campus, and also opportunities to learn from each other. And of course, our outstanding visiting guest speakers. Now, just a minor little point back to the celebration things, like where have we been able to, where are we now after such a short period of time? We've had several rounds of funding proposals. We've approved more and supported more than 20 research projects, planning groups, including large multi-investigator collaborative projects, emerging investigator pilot projects, organizational working groups, and they're all working along well. We've received additional funding to study COVID, and you'll hear some of these stories. And also, it's a good time to point out that the community partner networks that have been established by our talented researchers over years have made a huge difference in helping us launch a lot of these projects with such an impact in our communities. So, the progress has also resulted in publications, grant applications, and I expect we'll see a lot more from the conversations that have been initiated from the collaborations across the center. So finally, I wanted to just say that the center really embodies the mission of the School of Medicine, which we explicitly state is a mission to improve the health of the community that we serve. But it's also been a remarkable collaboration across campus. It involves nearly every school and college at UCR. And of course, special shout out to the leadership in the center from School of Medicine, the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, I did get that right, and the School of Public Policy. And so again, welcome, and I look forward to the ongoing conversations across disciplines and across campus.
Great.
Back to
Thank
you.
you, David. It's hard to believe that it feels like a long time in such a short time, and we've done so much. And so thank you for contextualizing where we are. The other piece in contextualizing where we are, for those of you who don't know us, that was Professor David Lowe in Biomedical Sciences, and I'm Juliet McMullen in Chaz, and we are co-directors for the center. And then I also want to acknowledge Monica Carson, Bruce Link, Jenna LeCompte Hinley, Anne Cheney, Tanya Neary, and Jennifer Syvertson and Yolanda Moses, who are also on our internal steering committee. And then I want to give a huge shout out for Catherine Rodriguez and Wyatt Kelly for all of their care, diligence in organizing the behind the scenes and social media work for the symposium. So this could not happen without you, and I am just so grateful for all the work that you've done. So David got to give you the big context of the center, and I get to share a little bit more about the theme for this year's symposium. And the theme of this year is examining structural racism in our research. And, it's been a hard year. And that's part of the reason we chose this theme. It's been a hard year. We've learned a lot of things. The pandemic and social justice movement for Black lives has shown us that the inequities, the systematic inequities and racism that exist in our institutions, in our practices, in ourselves, are deeply woven in. And so it's also been a year of grieving, grieving the loss of lives, and also grieving how deeply entrenched our racism is and the inequities that they produce. And so I just want to acknowledge all the people that we've lost this year and all of the lives that have been harmed. Um, And so if you don't mind taking a moment of silence in remembrance and thinking about them. Thank you. And in this, we are resilient. We are here. We are trying to address the inequities. And so our grief doesn't paralyze us, but rather provides us with a call to be present, to talk to each other, and to bring our collaborative skills to the moment. And it's only through working together that we can make the change. And again, the theme of this year's conference, Questioning Structural Racism in Our Research, is another point of conversation about how we can do our research better. So to quote from the Aspen Institute's definition of structural racism, it is a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Structural racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it has been a feature of the social, economic, and political systems in which we all exist. And so it means that we all have to be part of changing it. Research is the production of knowledge, and for us specifically to address health disparities in our community. But research is often viewed as something that only is done in universities or private companies. And so the spaces for structural racism in the institutions are increased. In our symposium, we are working at being reflective of how we are part of structural racism and where we can do it differently. What are the practices that we use that change how knowledge is created? Who are the people creating that knowledge? And what are the values of the researchers and research conducted? Our keynote speakers, Dr. Rupa Maria and Keith Murphy, will continue to push these questions, as well as so many of our presenters. The structure of the conference is also intentionally working at decolonizing and addressing structural racism. But we know we can do more, so we look forward to your feedback as well. And so as our conference begins, we begin with a panel from research that is taking place in the community and not part of the Center for Health Disparities Research. We also have a bilingual panel and brainstorming panels and panels that talk about the challenges that we're facing. As well, tonight, after Dr. Maria's presentation, we'll have an open discussion to better prepare ourselves to ask questions about structural racism throughout the whole symposium. We're also co-sponsoring our medical students conference, How We Heal, which is similarly focused on structural racism. And so I'd like to introduce Jennifer Grinseri, the director of the 2021 How We Heal conference, to tell you a little bit about that. So Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. McMullen. So my name is Jennifer. I'm a current fourth year at UC Riverside School of Medicine, and one of the planners for the Structural Competency Conference this year. We've had this is our third annual conference, and the previous years have been focused on the framework, and last year was focused on caring for immigrant communities, and this year similarly to what Dr. McMullen said, we're also talking about structural racism and systemic racism and how it affects medicine in terms of learners and patients and educators. And we're so grateful to have the support and the co-sponsorship from the Center for Health Disparities. I don't think we could have done it without you guys. So it's will occur this weekend, February 27th through the 28th from 8 to 12 on both days. We have a performance from Dr. Johnson, Eva Johnson, who is a poet and physician up in San Francisco, and Dr. Denise Davis as well, who is also a physician at UCSF and does a lot of work with medical education and anti-racism trainings. We also have some panels that talk about like race as a social determinant of health and structural racism and its effects on medical education, with many of the panelists actually, or some of them are here today, like Dr. Bruce Link is here. Thank you. And then we also have a day or some presentation sessions from some of our students and other students across the country that are presenting their projects and creative works as well, because we, realized we need to address how research is analyzed and qualitative. So registration closes tonight, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. We look forward to an exciting weekend as well. So that's what we have on tap for you. Tomorrow we have a number of concurrent panels. So make choices about where you want to be, but also know that we will be recording the sessions, so you can come back and watch them anytime. So David, is there anything else?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing all of the huge variety of topics discussed. I'm sorry I can't attend both of the concurrent meetings at the same time. There's too much going on. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I like it getting big. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So, and then also just notice that there's Spanish and English interpretation. If you'd like to do that, just click on the little world button at the bottom of your screen. So yeah, there's all sorts of ways that you can interact with the conference today. So thank you, David. And we'll go ahead and get started. So our first panel is research in the community. And as I mentioned, these are community partners that we work with, but the research that they're going to share today is not funded by the center. It's work that they are doing and that we are just so thrilled to be able to share with you. So if you'll notice on the conference homepage, you can click on their bios to get some more information. So I'm just going to give short introductions. Our speakers are Miss Tanya Humphrey, who is the chair of the Black Women's Leadership Forum in Riverside. It's a civil rights and community activist. She's a civil rights and community activist and a proud UCR alum. She is also CEO of the North Star Project. We also have Jenna LeCompte-Hinley, who is the CEO for Health Assessment and Research for Communities, which when we keep on saying HARC, that's who we're referring to, Health Assessment and Research for Communities. And Dr. Casey Lear, who is also with HARC, and she is the Director of Research and Evaluation. So welcome, panelists, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you. I believe Casey is the first speaker up.
I think it's actually Tanya.
My apologies, Tanya. Casey's all, oh no, wait.
Caught me off guard there.
Yeah, Tanya, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And first, let me clarify, I'm not really doing community research, I'm doing community work, and that's a little different. Most of the data that I collect is to simply satisfy some of my funders' requirements. I'll tell you a little about North Star Project. We started with offices downtown mid to 2019, of course, closed after COVID, but we were a shared workspace Our goal was to do Black economic development. We provided workshops, support, because what we realized is that we are terribly underrepresented when it comes to business. We own less than 1% of the businesses in Riverside County. But what happened, look at the wealth gap. So we were trying to see how people who had incomes $30,000 compared with Blacks who had incomes in excess of 150 per annual household. What we found, of course, is that poor people tended to spend their money doing the things that poor people do, paying rent, utilities, and didn't have a lot of resources. But we also found that the households that had 150, 200,000 Black, they were their housing was high financing. They were charged extraordinary interest rates. So the racism showed there. The other thing that happened after COVID, we started looking at the health of the people, these 500 folks. We have 103 households that had annual incomes of $150,000 or more. Our highest income of the people that we interviewed was 380,000. The lowest was 18,000. There were a couple things we found. Income did not improve the health of Black households, whereas with white households, the the wealthier they were, the better their health was. That was not the case in Black community. And I think that had to do with toxic stress. Black folks will tell you, we wear a mask. When I have worked for the city of Tulsa, where I ran a department and I answered to the mayor, the most stressful job I've ever had. I was the only Black person at the table, the only female at the table. So I wore my mask every day. And that's really stressful. And I think that and my son is in upper management now in corporate America. So I don't want to give you anecdotal stories, but I really want you to understand that there are very few times, I don't care how close you think you are to Black folks, that you interact with them when they don't have on their mask. That is toxic trauma and stress for us. So the higher up we go, the more we steel ourselves against that. And we found that with health. My presentation is going to be really brief because I'm not research oriented, but the one thing that we found most interesting about the folks, those 527 Black households that had diabetes, hypertension, heart issues, asthma, you name it, the best healthcare outcomes were with the 61 people who had Black primary healthcare providers. Okay? I have no white healthcare providers. My dentist is not white. I learned a long time ago, I have the right to ask for a Black healthcare provider. I interview my healthcare providers. So we found among those 61 people who had primary Black healthcare providers, they took less medication. They had better outcomes in terms of having weight loss, lower A1Cs, lower diabetes in control, heart, blood pressure under control. They felt listened to, they felt really heard, and those Black healthcare providers were less resistant what we considered culturally rooted healing practices. If I actually had COVID last year before we knew what COVID was, and I definitely credit my Black healthcare provider with saving my life. She came to my house about every other day. Um, and that's hard to come by. She listened to me when I told her what was going on with my body. And when I listen to people talk about structural stress and institutionalize this, it's almost as if you've decided there's this thing separate from white racism, and it isn't. There is no institution or structure that exists without the participation of racism. And so, I hear them saying, cities are declaring racism a mental health issue. But who is a mental health issue for? When are white folks going to start examining your issues, your problems. It's very easy to say, well, let's look at the effects of asthma. Let's look at how Black folks are being impacted by this and being impacted by that. I kind of equate that to people being able to say that George Floyd died from hypertension and drugs in his body, not acknowledging that there was a knee on his neck for 9 minutes. And I feel the same way when people talk about institutional racism, institutional this, structural that. That's the knee on our neck for 400 years. But it's your knee. And to be quite honest, I think if I were to say, looking at the center that's doing all this research, what do the people look like who are in positions to make decisions about what that research is and how that money is spent? I doubt that many of them look like me. Power sharing is really difficult to give up. Power is really difficult. So I'm going to say that. I don't think there's much else. Like I said, I am an activist. I work in the community. We went from, well, last year we actually launched 19 businesses, ranging from personal trainers to a Black-owned staffing agency, to a gentleman who built a 300, I think, unit storage facility in Lake Havasu. While having money may not improve our health, having money certainly can give you access to some things that being broke and sick is worse than having money and being ill. So we put a great deal of emphasis on closing that racial gap, looking at how wealth is stripped out of our communities through rent, payday loans, and high interest rates. Those are all, I think, part of the structural causes of illness in our communities. And I don't know what the answer is, because I don't believe that we can provide the answer to what I believe is a white problem, and that is institutionalized racism. We can't fix that. You have to fix that. We will just continue to treat the symptoms of that knee on our neck. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Any questions?
That's powerful. We have a couple minutes for questions, and then we'll take more questions at the end as well. So, are there any questions?
I see David.
David's clapping.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. That's very powerful, and I love that you were the first speaker for our symposium. We should be thinking about how the institutions are putting the knee on the neck. So, thank you. Mm-hmm. So our next speaker is Jenna LeCompte Henley.
Thank you. And thank you, Tanya. I love hearing about your organization. We're one of our friends in the Coachella Valley runs a similar organization for Hispanic entrepreneurs and supporting them in becoming business owners. And I think it's such fantastic work, and it's really fascinating to hear about what you do. So my name is Jenna LeCompte Henley, and I'm the CEO of HARC. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our recent studies on COVID. So HARC is a nonprofit research organization. We are based in Palm Desert. And the idea behind HARC was the idea that Riverside County is really big and very diverse, and that there are some things that are issues in Coachella Valley region that aren't so much issues in Riverside. And the local organizations that provide services needed funds to be able to target those services, and they needed data to tell that story. So HARC was born out of that. So we are researchers that aren't affiliated with any academic institution. Like I said, we're a nonprofit, and our expertise is really community-based research. So having these friends and these providers in our community, and we focus on the social determinants of health. So that is that where you live, work, learn, and play matters. So this particular needs assessment, when COVID hit, obviously we thought we need some data on this. We need data to understand it. And what we really wanted to do was provide it to our service providers. So obviously everybody wants to help, but what is the right way to help? How can you help in ways that are most needed? Because, you know, if for instance, somebody needs food and you're giving them transportation, you're not solving their problems. So we wanted to provide that data. We were fortunate enough to have several private donors step up. Lucy Arnaz really made this all happen. She brought in the funding from the John P. Monahan Foundation and the Western Wind Foundation. So we did data for 1 month, data collection for 1 month in June and July. We did a quick and dirty survey in English and Spanish, and obviously this is a tough one because it means that anybody who didn't have access to the internet got left out of this survey, right? And that's very unfortunate because those are the people who probably have really, really high needs. And I'll speak to that a bit at the end. We pushed it out through our friends, our networks, and we were able to get a good sample size. So we thought about what do we need to know? What are our friends, these service providers, what do they need to know? Well, demographics, of course, comorbidities. What are those things that are associated with poor health outcomes with COVID? What about COVID testing and symptoms? Are people getting tested? Are they experiencing symptoms? And then, of course, what are their attitudes towards these preventative measures? Shelter in place, social distancing, mask use. Do they believe in it for themselves, for others? Are they actually doing it? And most importantly, what is the impact of COVID? What's the impact on their employment? What's the impact on their economic needs? What's the impact on their mental health, their alcohol use? What do they need? Where are they getting help currently? Where could more help be provided? So it's a big report, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'm not going to go over all of that. I'm going to focus mostly on mental health, but you can go to our website. You can get the report for free. We make all of our reports there, and it's available as a cute little infographic in English and Spanish too, in case you just want to hit the highlights with pretty pictures, because let's be honest, that's a more fun way to look at research. So we had 624 participants, and we had a good geographic distribution. We had some in the Far East Valley, in Mecca and North Shore, all the way over to Desert Hot Springs. We had, and I compared it to the overall population, it was pretty representative. We had slightly underrepresented in Indio and overrepresented in Palm Springs, but for the most part, a nice swath of the valley. We had a third were Hispanic Latino. We had 2/3 that were female of the respondents. And our household composition, we had ran the whole 9 yards, from people who live alone to people with multi-generational households. And about half of them had a comorbidity such as high blood pressure or obesity or HIV that really put them at high risk for COVID. So one of the questions we asked was, how much has COVID changed your day-to-day life? And you can see that for the most people, it had a big impact. There are less than 1% who said it had no impact on them at all, but about 10% said it only had a little impact. And you can see some of the quotes that we pulled out. You know, somebody said, I didn't have much of a social life, so it's not a big deal to me. But others are really having a hard time, right? It's hard when you can't hug your children. It's very difficult. Especially, we had one story that we published sort of in long form in there. If you are a multi-generational household, which many of our Hispanic households are, then you are used to seeing your grandkids every day. And if one of you gets COVID and you suddenly cannot see them for weeks at a time, it's a big deal, even if they have somewhere to go to. So we looked at the people who were employed before the pandemic hit and after, and 23% of those who were employed lost their jobs in 6 months. So that's 1 in every 5 workers lost their job. And those who were still employed, a lot of them were very worried about losing their job in the future. There were some serious negative impacts on mental health, right? People felt lonely, depressed, they had trouble sleeping, they felt nervous or anxious. But on the plus side, in green, hopeful, we had a decent amount who felt hopeful about the future. most or all of the time. So 5 to 7 days a week. So at least this was in June again. At least in June, we still had a lot of hope. I hope it's the same now. And people told their stories, right? Some of them were just heartbreaking. One person that I didn't put up here, she said, my sister died, so everything is worse. But you see some things are unfortunate, but relatively low impact, like lack of motivation and drive, versus I'm bipolar. So by mid-April, I was a wreck, alone, and forgotten. This takes a huge toll on people with mental illness. And then I did think this one was funny. Irritation with husband, too much time together. Too much can be a bad thing sometimes. But it wasn't all bad. There were also positive impacts, right? People were cooking more and eating healthier. They spent more time with their friends and family. They spent less time commuting. That's good for them, good for the environment. Getting more sleep and exercising more. So it's important that it's not all bad, that this pandemic has some positive impacts. There's a lot of people who said, you know, their craft projects or things that they did, but I love this last quote. I spent considerably less time on social media and more time communicating one-on-one or in small groups with the people I really care about. So I think that really showed that some people had really positive coping mechanisms. We also took a look at Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC, which, as Tanya mentioned, often get hit hardest by this issue because they have the less resources to start out with. And we found, not surprisingly, some significant findings. Our BIPOC participants were significantly more likely to report major impact from COVID on their life, including more difficulty sleeping, more frequent anxiety. They had more trouble paying their rent or their mortgage, and they had more trouble being able to afford food. So this really, again, this is meant to assist our service providers. This points out that they really need to provide additional services and additional consideration for our BIPOC community if they're going to make a difference. So as I mentioned, it was less than ideal. An online survey always leaves out some people, and we really would love to do it better. As Juliet said at the beginning, you know, we always know we can do better. So we are very fortunate that we're good friends with our county public health department, and they were able to write in for a grant from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, to pay for a large scale needs assessment for all of Riverside County. And this is going to address some of the problems with our study, because ours was quick and dirty and cheap. It'll be via mail instead of on the internet, so that it will be accessible to people who don't have the internet, who are very, very important. We'll also have an option that people can take it on the phone so that it's accessible for people who can't read. Again, very, very important. So we're really looking forward to this. We're just beginning the project right now. The other piece that I'm excited that we'll be able to do is compensate everybody who takes the survey. So everybody gets a Visa card for their time, because their time is valuable, and their time to tell us how this has impacted their lives and what they need is really, really valuable. So we are launching now, and we hope to have it complete by the end of 2021. And of course, public health has the same goals that we do, that we're going to make this as accessible and fun to read as possible, so that people can put it into action right away and can really take that information and make change with it. So I'm really excited that we're doing this big survey. So if you hear more about it, don't avoid me. We love to get lots of input on any survey we design. So if you're interested in, saying, hey, this is a topic you really need to assess, people need to know about XYZ, please do reach out to me. I'm so open to that, and I would love your input to make sure that this survey really is providing the information and the research that we need in this day. So that's all I have. I hope I didn't take up too much time. Oh, I'm right on time. So thank you so much. And thank you, Catherine, for putting the link in the chat. And I will now turn it back over to Juliet.
Great. Thank you, Jenna. That was wonderful. It's so fascinating to see uh, the range of things that are happening in our community. So we'll go ahead and hold questions. And I see there's a question in the chat, so we'll get to them after the presenters, if that's all right. So our next presenter is Casey Lear, also from HARC. So.
In case you didn't have enough HARC, there's always a little bit more. So my name is Casey Lear. I'm the Director of Research for HARC. Jenna described that we do community-based research, so this is really right up our alley. I'm excited to share with you about a project we've been doing for Desert Healthcare District, which is a community health needs assessment of our region. This project was designed intentionally at the outset to be inclusive and try and include all different perspectives and make sure that we truly understand our community, but we had to very thoughtfully pivot given the COVID-19 pandemic and all that comes with it. So today I'll be telling you about the community health needs assessment we're wrapping up and almost finished with. I want to talk about the top needs we've identified for our community and how we're going about developing a pathway to improve the health on those 5 top areas we've identified. So many of you have heard of a community health needs assessment, but if you haven't, I want to just really quickly touch on it. A community health needs assessment is a really systematic process of identifying the top needs in a community, and it's done by using data collection and analysis. And of course, a very important and critical piece that comes after that is developing a health improvement plan. So once you identify top needs in a community, you really have to think about, how do we improve this? How do we make it better? If you break a leg and go to your doctor, you have to say, what's the pathway to getting this leg better? How do I get fully functional and ready to go? So the health improvement plan is certainly an important part of that. Also important and extremely invaluable is hearing from the community and making sure that we're getting their input throughout this whole process. We can be data people and sit in an office and look at numbers on a spreadsheet, but if we don't hear the voice of our community and what they think our needs are, then we really can't make a plan to improve health. It's really kind of a moot point. So getting community input is invaluable, and the ultimate goal is improving the health of our entire region. Just an overview of this specific project specifically, we were contracted by Desert Healthcare District in January 2020 to do the CHNA and the CHIP, the Health Improvement Plan. If you aren't familiar with the Desert Healthcare District, they provide grants to local organizations who are working to improve health in the Coachella Valley. Their goal is ultimately to improve community health, but in order to do that, they have to know what those top needs are. If we don't have a good grasp of what the needs are, then we're really spending money and devoting our efforts unnecessarily. So really knowing what the needs are and the path to improving that is really essential. As I mentioned before, this started back in January 2020 when life was normal, and in March of 2020, our life turned upside down. The way we do work and the way we engage changed fundamentally. So we needed to really pivot and make sure that we're remaining inclusive and remain true to our mission. We knew that this project was critical to conduct. We need to know the needs of our community, and we couldn't put it aside. I think Conrado Barzaga, the CEO of Desert Healthcare District, really insisted we can't delay. We have to know what the needs of our community are, and we have to persist despite the many obstacles in our way. We looked at data for 12 different health topics, and they're all listed here. Some of them are typical things you would think of, obesity, mental health, substance use. But we also looked at those upstream factors of health: education, economic stability. We know that those are really important precursors to having good health throughout your life. So we wanted to make sure that we also considered those factors. The way we went about prioritizing health needs came from 3 different sources of information. We didn't want to just look at data. While we know data is important, we love data, of course, but we wanted to make sure that we're getting input from the community. What do they think? What are they feeling in their everyday life are the needs and issues that they're seeing? So we gathered data from 3 sources. Our CHNA data report is a beast. It's gigantic, and it has 80 more data indicators. I lost track after 80. It's likely much higher than that. We gathered data from a variety of public health data sources. We're so lucky that there's so many really great data sources out there that we could look at data from. We also had community focus groups. We held 40 focus groups with 205 members of the community on Zoom. We made sure to let members know that while it's on Zoom, you can just dial in through a phone number. You can have a flip phone and you can still participate and contribute. Focus groups were held in English and Spanish. And the way that we recruited people was by reaching out to our nonprofit partners who serve our community, and kind of a snowball effort. Reach out to those you serve and make sure that we're getting input from everyone. We had people from organizations who serve people with disabilities, seniors, far-reaching people in the East Valley who didn't speak English. So we made sure that we were trying to just get every single person involved and meet them in the way that they wanted to be met. Some of them were people with disabilities. We made phone calls individually and had those private conversations. Other times with some of the upscale partners, we could have Zoom meetings and everyone was electronically chatting via video, and that was fine. So we had English and Spanish focus groups. Roughly 27% of the focus groups were participants were entirely Spanish speaking. So we were happy to get their input on what they thought community needs are. We also held focus groups with our community leaders. We had 9 focus groups and we had 31 leaders join us for those discussions. I found that to be a really valuable conversation to have, is like, these people serving our community every single day, what do they see as the top needs in our community? So we weaved together these three data sources and came up with a list of top 5 health needs in our region. And those are listed here, which are access to healthcare, education access and quality, environment, economic stability, and mental health. And we were pretty excited that some of those upstream factors, in fact, did rise to the top. Even our community members recognized that economic stability is a big problem. There's people suffering with low incomes, poor paying jobs who don't even provide healthcare. And that education is a good way to get those good jobs and a good way to have good health throughout your life. So these are the top 5. And then what was great about having focus groups is people didn't just check boxes of what the top needs are in the community. They really gave in-depth descriptions of what the issues were. So if we look just at access to healthcare, our community members know there's a healthcare shortage. They know it's hard to get an appointment with a doctor and that they get 5 minutes with the doctor. And they can see exactly what our data is telling us, that there is quantitatively a shortage of physicians in our region. But there are other issues. Quality of healthcare needs to improve. The cost is out of control. East Coachella Valley lacks a lot of healthcare access, and they're seeing that. I won't read all of these. You can go ahead and pick through the ones that are important and relevant to you. I'll talk about mental health. Many people describe mental health as a struggle in the community, and a big piece of that is the lack of resources and services that are desperately needed in our region. So we have those top 5 health needs. So how do we make sure that we put that data into action? We're currently waist deep in getting the data put into action. So I wanted to just cover a little bit of how we're doing that. We're currently hosting focus groups with our community leaders, asking them what they think are the effective strategies to improving health in our region in these certain ways. So we've held a number of focus groups. On the next slide, I'll discuss some of those ideas that have surfaced from our community focus groups. They've gone really well. We'll also do an asset mapping process where we lay out our existing resources we have in our community. We're not starting from scratch. We have resources in the community that can help us. We have, for thinking about mental health, Jewish Family Service, Latino Commission. These are places working really hard at improving health in the region. So we're not starting from scratch, which is definitely wonderful. And then lastly, the district had this idea. They wanted to create a community dashboard on their website so they can track community health over time on these top 5 areas. We want to see that we're making progress and moving forward. And if we're falling behind in a certain area, that's a place where we can then identify to improve and devote extra efforts and attention. So I talked a little bit about the health improvement plan and how we're going to go about improving health in these areas. This is like a very fresh result from some ideas our community leaders have had on how to improve mental health in our region. So Just one of the objectives we had was to increase the number of mental health providers, clinics, and resources. So some of our top mental health leaders have had some ideas jotted down here. Create a more diverse workforce that includes both English and Spanish speaking. Create mental health care path programs in high schools. So we know we're creating doctors at young ages in high schools, but let's start planting the seed early that mental health is a great career path. And then lastly, one of I thought a really wonderful idea was to think broader about mental health other than counselors and therapists. Let's create social recreation, community support groups. Let's go about fostering positive mental health in other ways rather than just one-on-one cognitive behavioral therapy with someone every other week. So these are just some initial ideas and how we're going about improving mental health in our region. So just some key takeaway facts, some learning lessons that I had throughout this process that, were kind of interesting to me, were to really make sure that you're always giving back to your community throughout the entire research process. Certainly you should give gift cards when you can. We always love, I feel like Oprah when I get to give people $25 gift cards. It makes me happy to give back to people who are often just in such need. But I think it's also important to, leave people with encouragement and support and feel like, you're supported and you're doing your best. And we know you're suffering and struggling in these certain ways, and other people are too, but we're doing our best and we're working hard to improve our region. I think it's also important to be mindful of the environment and what we're going through. So we were having these focus groups with community members in the midst of COVID-19. We made sure to give a space to say, what are you suffering with and what are you struggling with given the pandemic? Like, what's been hard for you? And I think they just appreciated having a space to say, this is hard. My kids are driving me crazy. I'm stuck in the house. I haven't exercised. Like, there's a therapeutic process in just creating community in this online space. And then lastly, always think of who you can include and who's being excluded. We think so hard about every group and making sure that we can reach them. So every day we wake up and think, how do we reach the seniors, people with disabilities, low income, people with low internet, and always thinking of who is missing from the table and try and include them. So thank you for having me. I was so excited to share about this with you. Stay tuned for what's to come in our health improvement plan. We'd love for any of you to be a part of that in any way that you can.
Great. Thank you, Casey. That was just a wonderful set of presentations. We have a question for Tanya Humphrey in the chat, and then if other people have questions too, you can raise your hand for our presenters. So I'll start with the question in the chat. So the person asking the question says, I agree and struggle with this idea that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, but that sometimes that's paralyzing. What are some things that we can do from Tanya's perspective while we wait for these large-scale changes to embedded racism to happen?
Well, I think the first problem is the idea that you're waiting for a large change to happen. I always like to use Fannie Lou Hamer as a great example. Here's a woman who was, I think, went through the 6th or 7th grade, worked on a plantation, her husband did, and this is the 70s. And she managed, she just said, I'm tired. And she was able to organize the Democratic Freedom Party. She got thousands of people. She ended up being she forced her way into being a delegate at the Democratic Convention. You don't wait, honey. That's the problem. You don't wait. There are two things that can affect change from when I worked in large departments where we were overfunding. I always tell people there's two ways that you can get things done. You either hurt the oppressor or help the oppressor. You've got to find a way to do either of the other. We've been studied to death. So Black folks, we don't need to be studied anymore. What we need to understand is, first let me explain. I'm 70 plus. I have lived through Jim Crow, integration. I was born in Oklahoma, but I was real fortunate that I was born into a family of entrepreneurs, bootleggers, illegal gambling houses, and all of that good stuff. We transitioned that money into general storage properties. When my father died, my father's Native American. When he died, he owned 3,000 acres. I now own those 3,000 acres. We owned more land and property in the 50s than we do now. We have got to take responsibility, because what you need to understand, sweetheart, white folks are not going to fund our freedom. They are not going to fund our freedom. We're going to have to do it ourselves. No one's going to come and rescue you. You do not wait for anything. You learn to pivot. Right now, we are feeding people, we are housing people, we're doing whatever is necessary for our community. We have to redefine community. I have friends who have just moved to Georgia, bought large land. They're building a community. I'm helping them become a Chodo. We need to start thinking about not what people will research us until we are dead. They have been doing it forever, you know. It is time to I was raised in a segregated South. And you know what I tell people? I was a colored princess in a colored paradise. No one could have ever told me I was not special. It took going to an integrated school for me to start internalizing that I was not enough. We need to go back and educate our own children. I tell people homeschooling for our children have been the best thing that could have happened this year. People are not going to give you the education to liberate yourselves. They are not going to give you the information that you need. You have to do it yourself, sweetheart. There's nobody coming. Don't wait on that raft. You've got to learn how to build one. Anything else?
Thank you, Tanya. That was amazing. Just the kind of action and encouragement and just telling it like it is for us to do something. So yeah, thank you. Did you want to, I see you wanting to add something more?
Yeah, I want to say, when you get to be my age and you have lived, you become impatient. I tell people the wonderful thing about becoming a 70-something-year-old woman is that you have leeway to kind of say what you want, and no one, I'm a big mama. So you have gone to listen to me even if you don't agree. Okay? I have paid the price for that. I lived when I had to get off the sidewalk to let white folks go by. Okay? I will not take anything from anyone. I have earned the privilege of my greatness.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, and sharing with us. Other questions or want to continue that conversation? When I'm thinking about this for Hark, Jenna or Casey, I also was wondering, and thank you for your presentations and the information that was there. And I was kind of wondering a similar thing. How do you take that data, the information that you're having, and create those transformations in the institutions? So how does it get back to the institutions that we need to change? So if you're working on that part of.
That's a really good question, Juliet. So sometimes our projects want us to do that, right? Like Casey was telling you about doing the community health improvement plan. This is how we will go about doing this. This is the partners we will need. These are the funding resources that will need to be allocated, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes they want to make those conclusions for themselves. So sometimes we present them the data, and more than once I've said, here are the implications of what needs to change based on the data. And they've said, it is not your job to make those recommendations, right? It is our job to say, here's what we will do with this information. So it varies. It varies based on those preferences. And so really at Hark, our job is to give communities, community leaders, community members as much accurate community-based information as we possibly can so they can make informed decisions. You know, sadly, we cannot force people to do what we want. Always bummed out about that, but we can at least equip them with data that undeniably highlights the needs and the sub-communities that have those needs and shine a light on those needs. Casey, is there anything you want to add?
I think you covered it for me.
I had a question, maybe I could. Well, before I ask my question though, first of all, I wanted to thank Tanya again. It reminded me, you know, talking about having earned your voice, it reminded me of what we tell faculty once they earn tenure. And it's like, if we could grant you a version of tenure in life, you know, except obviously we don't need to, you've already got it. But anyway, moving on, moving on to the HARC thing. I was going to ask Casey, the needs assessment thing is fascinating to me because you really, it was clear from what you've done already, you've highlighted the priority issues. But I imagine that when you start separating out the different communities, the priorities may shift. And so the question is, how do you address that?
I think where we try and weave in those different pieces throughout, and luckily a lot of our nonprofit partners who provided input are from the senior centers, are from organizations that serve Hispanics in the East Valley. So we make sure to just integrate their voices as much as possible. And as I've been reading through some of the like activities that need to get there, a lot of them are about Spanish speaking, low income. So I think we just make sure we elevate those voices and make them on equal playing field as other areas.
But so, for example, though, in say in the communities in, you know, the HIV positive community, right? That is, they may have more specialized set of priorities, or and so on. So even within, and I imagine even within the Latino community, there may be different, you know, parts where there's people, say, more specialized issues with the agriculture workers, say, or, you know, those sorts of things. And I think this is kind of the conversation when people have about equality versus equity, is like everybody can be given a voice, but still, you know, how do you mediate among all of the different communities' needs?
I think a really interesting thing about the massive report that we did was we broke down all the data that we could by individual city, because for those of you who've ever been to the Coachella Valley, one of the wealthiest places in the world is 25 miles away from one of the absolute poorest places in all of California. And so looking at those, our cities are not homogenous in any way, shape, or form. You know, the median household income in Mecca is like $20,000, and in Indian Wells, it's, you know, 6 figures and up. And so I think the fact that the district was very aware of that and asked for those differentials, so that yes, you can talk about the needs on this big broad playing field, but you can also hone in on those specific populations. And I think the only way to continue to do that is to continue to be connected in the community. So I think that's why this community health improvement plan will address some of those pockets, right? And then the ability to put it out to the world and say, hey, what are we missing? Helps for someone like, you know, you mentioned the HIV community, and I see that we have HARP, HIV and Aging Research Project Palm Springs, on our call. I'm a proud board member. You know, if we left them out, HARP could come to us and say, hey, you know, we're a population in need. Let's adapt this.
Do we have additional questions? So I'm kind of wondering from each of you, if the research is part of the solution, part of the problem. Um, what would you, and as a research center, then what would you want to see us do differently um, to really address these questions of structural racism and the ways that this you showed us so powerfully how it's playing out in your communities.
I think one of the things I admire most about the center is how you are going about doing that, right? All of your research is uh, guided by community advisory boards from the very communities you're talking about. And I think that is something that I really, really respect and admire. And of course, like you said at the beginning, we can always do better. But that paired with the fact that you make research accessible for community members, like the trainings that have been going on to train community members how to conduct focus groups and tell their community stories. I think that capacity building and giving back is so wonderful. So uh, that's not a good answer other than I really admire, because a lot of places that say they do community engaged research don't actually do it as well as you guys do.
It's interesting to hear that, Jenna, because when Tanya started off, she was saying, she doesn't do research, but, there can be a distinction between research and service. But I think the way you're describing it, Jenna, it's the same, it can be the same thing, is that empowering the communities to gather the data and use that for advocacy, use that for making change in policy and things like that. It's no longer service, it's no longer research, it's service.
Yeah, so for instance, if somebody said, oh, Hark, would you do research on Black business owners? My first step would be to call Tanya, that and have her drive the content while I drive the geeky stuff, So I think it's that pairing and that recognition that we can't ever be content experts in all of the areas, right? But we can partner with people who have that lived experience, and their voice is just as important, if not more important than ours. And it's that partnership that produces good research, in my mind.
I wanted to add one additional thing, is that I think UCR also does a good job of compensating people, community members, for their time for participating. I know the data training that Ann Cheney's doing for the last few weeks has been compensating people for their time. If you want people to participate and give their time, the best way to get people from these minority groups or low income, hard to reach areas, like pay them for their time, pay them for their expertise, for their efforts. I didn't have an easy time paying for college, so I couldn't do things that were unpaid. So to give those opportunities for people to participate, that's a great way of leveling the playing field. We have to be mindful of doing everything we can to give back.
Tanya, did you want to contribute? Okay, thank you.
I say this.
Go ahead.
I was really introduced to this and Tanya Neri, who I have tremendous respect for, through a 2 or 3 day training with the community and the university. And that engagement was invaluable. It really was. I believe Greer Sullivan organized it, if I'm not mistaken. And it was 2 or 3 days. And she brought in someone from Arkansas to facilitate. It was done in the community. And there were a lot of community activists nonprofit directors there. We switched roles in terms of who was playing the researcher and the community worker. And that was probably, and I'm a graduate of UC Riverside, but that was the first time I think I genuinely felt that connection between the university and the community. As far as we're concerned, you sit out there in that wonderful ivory tower and we know nothing about it. Um, and I want to add this. I went to UC Riverside, and when they had a Black Studies department, Jesse McDade was the director. We had Dr. Jacqueline Hayward, Dr. Hooks, a lot of Black professors. But we were a college within a college. I was president of the BSU. Let me say, I graduated in 73, so it would have been 72, 73. We were at home. We felt comfortable. The graduation rate was high. My mother worked in the food department at UC Riverside while I was a student there. It was a state job, so we considered that a good job at the time. But it was nothing for me to go visit my mother, who was working in the cafeteria, and Dr. Jesse McDade and Jacqueline Hayward and all of those people would be at my mother's house playing cards and eating barbecue. There was a sense of community that reached out in the 60s and 70s. We simply don't see that anymore. We don't feel a part of that anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's something more that we can do. Um, and to know that it existed and then now it's not here. Um, we don't want to go backwards anymore. So thank you so much for this terrific panel and conversation. We have on our schedule that there's going to be an introductory remark from Dean Dees, but we're going to save that till tomorrow morning and rather take a break right now, 10 minutes, because I think it would be really useful for us to take a moment and reflect on what Tanya and Jenna and Casey shared and think about, maybe make a little list, like an aspiration of what is it that we're going to do? What is our next step in changing structural racism as it's occurring in our research? Based on what they shared, what is the next step for you? And so I encourage you to take a piece of paper and write that out. And we'll have a little 10-minute stretch break and we'll come back and hear about the projects from our brand new awardees. So thank you for participating. And I feel like I should have a little gong so that I can do the little tune for when it's over and when you come back, but we'll make some sound so you can hear it on your speaker. It's time to come back again, okay? So 10-minute break. Thank you.